The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. I could feel the weight of every stare burning into my back as I sat alone at the defendant table. Across the aisle, my soon-to-be ex-wife Jessica sat smugly next to her high-priced attorney. They whispered and snickered as if my complete financial destruction was just another day at the office for them. I gripped the edge of the wooden table, trying to steady my shaking hands. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button if you have ever been underestimated, and subscribe to hear how I turned the tables when everyone thought I had lost everything. I met Jessica 5 years ago at a tech networking event in downtown Seattle. At the time, I was working as a senior developer for a small software company called ByteSecure. The company specialized in cybersecurity solutions for small businesses, and while it was not making me rich, I enjoyed the work and the people I collaborated with daily. The event was hosted by a major tech conglomerate looking to partner with smaller firms in the area. I was there representing ByteSecure, showcasing some of our latest security features to potential clients and partners. I was in the middle of a demonstration when Jessica walked over to my booth. "That is impressive encryption speed," she said, examining the screen with genuine interest. "Most systems I have seen take twice as long to process that amount of data." She introduced herself as the marketing director for TechFront Solutions, a mid-sized company that specialized in business software integration. With her sharp blazer, confident posture, and intelligent questions, Jessica immediately stood out from the crowd of tech professionals mingling around us. "I am Maynard Wilson," I replied, surprised by her technical knowledge. "Most marketing people do not notice things like encryption speed." She laughed, a sound that would become both familiar and eventually haunting to me in the years to come. "I make it my business to understand every aspect of the products I market. You cannot sell what you do not understand." We exchanged business cards, and I thought that would be the end of our interaction. But the next day I received an email from her suggesting a coffee meeting to discuss potential collaboration between our companies. That coffee meeting turned into dinner, and dinner turned into something more personal than professional. Jessica was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. She was ambitious, driven, and seemed to value the same things I did. She understood my passion for coding and security systems. When I talked about my work, she not only listened but asked insightful questions that pushed my thinking further. After a few months of dating, I shared with her an idea I had been working on in my spare time. It was an application that could provide enhanced security for cloud-based data through a unique encryption algorithm I had developed. "This could be revolutionary, Maynard," she said, her eyes lighting up as I explained the concept. "The market for this kind of security solution is exploding right now." Her excitement fueled my own, and I began dedicating more of my free time to developing the application. Jessica was supportive, often bringing dinner to my apartment when I was coding late into the night. She would sit beside me working on her marketing plans while I programmed. It felt like we were building something together, both in our relationship and in our careers. After a year of dating, I proposed during a weekend trip to the San Juan Islands. We were watching the sunset over the water when I got down on one knee and asked her to be my wife. Her yes was immediate and enthusiastic, and we celebrated with champagne under the stars, talking about our future together until the early hours of the morning. Our wedding was small but beautiful. We exchanged vows in a rustic lodge, surrounded by about 50 of our closest friends and family. My parents, who had flown in from Ohio, beamed with pride as they welcomed Jessica into the family. Her parents, successful business owners from California, were equally approving of our union. With our combined incomes, we were able to put a down payment on a modest house in a pleasant suburb outside Seattle. It needed some work, but we spent weekends painting walls and fixing up the garden, turning it into a home we were proud of. The first 2 years of our marriage were happy ones. Jessica continued to climb the corporate ladder at TechFront, eventually being promoted to Director of Marketing. I remained at ByteSecure, where I was promoted to lead developer, overseeing a small team of programmers. In our free time, I continued working on my security application, and Jessica continued to support and encourage my efforts. We talked about starting a family, but agreed to wait until we were more established in our careers. Instead, we focused on building our savings and investing in our future. We contributed to our retirement accounts, paid extra on our mortgage, and lived relatively frugally despite our growing incomes. Looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs earlier. The shift in our relationship was subtle at first, like a slow leak that you do not notice until the damage is already done. It began with small changes in Jessica's behavior. She started working later hours, often not coming home until well after 8 or 9 in the evening. When I asked about it, she would talk about important projects and demanding clients. Given her ambition, it seemed reasonable enough at first. "You know how it is in this industry, Maynard," she would say. "You have to put in the hours if you want to get ahead." I tried to keep our connection strong despite her busy schedule. I planned date nights and weekend getaways, but increasingly Jessica would cancel at the last minute due to work emergencies. Our anniversary dinner was postponed 3 times before we finally celebrated 2 weeks late with a rushed meal at a restaurant where Jessica spent most of the time checking emails on her phone. When she was home, her attitude toward me had changed as well. She became critical of my career choices, suggesting that I lacked ambition for staying with ByteSecure instead of pursuing opportunities at larger tech companies. "You could be making twice what you are making now if you would just put yourself out there," she would say. "Google or Microsoft would snap you up in a heartbeat with your skills." I explained that I valued the work-life balance and creative freedom my current position afforded me, particularly as it allowed me time to develop my security application. But Jessica seemed increasingly dismissive of my project as well. "How long have you been working on that thing now?" 3 years. "At some point you need to either make it happen or move on." Despite her growing skepticism, I continued refining my application. After 3 years of development, I had created a security solution that offered unprecedented protection for cloud-stored data. Early tests showed it was faster and more secure than anything currently on the market. I began reaching out to potential investors, and to my excitement, several expressed serious interest. When I shared this news with Jessica, expecting her to be thrilled, her reaction was oddly muted. "That is nice," she said, barely looking up from her laptop. "Just make sure you get a good lawyer to look over any contracts." Her lack of enthusiasm was disappointing, but I tried not to let it dampen my spirits. I decided to establish my own startup company to develop and market the application properly. I called it Secure Vault and began the process of setting it up as a legitimate business entity. Around this time, I started noticing other concerning patterns in Jessica's behavior. There were hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room, unexplained withdrawals from our joint bank account that she attributed to business expenses but could never quite specify when I asked for details, text messages that she quickly deleted when she saw me looking in her direction. One evening while Jessica was taking a shower, her phone lit up with a notification. I normally would not have looked, but the name on the screen caught my attention: Daniel Thompson. He was a venture capitalist I had approached about investing in Secure Vault. Why would he be texting my wife directly? The message preview only showed "confirmed for tomorrow at 2, bringing the documents you requested." When I casually mentioned Daniel's name over breakfast the next morning, Jessica nearly choked on her coffee. "Why are you bringing him up?" she asked, her voice unnaturally high. "Just wondering if you know him. He is one of the investors I have been talking to about Secure Vault." "Oh," she said, visibly relaxing. "The name sounds familiar, but I cannot place him. How are those meetings going?" Her reaction heightened my suspicions. That day, instead of going to work, I hired a private investigator named Frank Russo. I felt terrible about it, but I needed to know what was happening. 3 days later, Frank called me to his office. The evidence he presented made me physically ill. Photos showed Jessica meeting with Daniel Thompson at an upscale hotel restaurant. There was nothing explicitly romantic in their behavior, but the familiarity between them was obvious. Frank had also obtained copies of emails between them, dating back 6 months. What was most disturbing, however, was what Frank discovered next. Jessica had been systematically copying my research and code for the security application. There were emails where she shared my proprietary algorithms with Daniel, along with business plans I had drafted for Secure Vault. "They have formed a company together," Frank explained, sliding a document across his desk. "TechShield LLC was registered 2 months ago, with Jessica and Daniel listed as co-founders." The betrayal was staggering. Not only was my wife having at minimum an inappropriate business relationship with another man, but they were actively stealing my intellectual property to launch a competing business. I thanked Frank and paid his final bill, then drove to a park where I sat in my car for hours, trying to process what I had learned. I decided not to confront Jessica immediately. Instead, I would continue gathering evidence while securing my work and preparing for what I now realized was inevitable. The other shoe dropped exactly 17 days after my meeting with Frank. I came home from work to find Jessica sitting at our dining room table with a folder of papers in front of her. "I want a divorce," she said, without preamble, her voice cold and clinical. "These are the papers. I think it would be best if you moved out tonight." Even though I had been expecting something like this, the bluntness of it still took my breath away. I remained standing, my laptop bag still slung over my shoulder. "May I ask why?" I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "We have grown apart, Maynard. I need more than what this marriage is offering me." She pushed the folder toward me. "My lawyer has drawn up an initial settlement proposal. Given that my income has been supporting us while you pursued your side project, I am asking for 70% of our assets." I picked up the folder but did not open it. "And what about Secure Vault, my application?" For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, calculation perhaps, or greed. "The intellectual property developed during our marriage is considered communal property," she said smoothly. "Since I provided financial support while you developed it, I am entitled to a significant stake. The proposal includes me retaining the rights to the security application." So that was the play. She and Daniel had realized they could not simply steal my work without consequences. Instead, they would use our divorce to legally obtain the rights to my creation. It was almost elegant in its ruthlessness. "I will need time to review this with my own lawyer," I said. Jessica smirked. "Of course. I have retained Raymond Walsh to represent me. I suggest you find someone equally competent, though I doubt you can afford anyone in his league." Raymond Walsh was one of the most expensive divorce attorneys in Seattle, known for representing tech executives and local celebrities in high-profile divorces. She was right that I could not afford someone of his caliber, but I would find a way to fight this. I did not move out that night. Instead, I slept in our guest room and contacted a lawyer first thing the next morning. Most of the attorneys I called required retainers well beyond my means, especially after I discovered Jessica had emptied our joint savings account the previous week. I was nearly ready to give up when I found Sarah Jenkins, a relatively new attorney who had recently opened her own practice specializing in high-tech divorces. "I cannot match Walsh's experience," Sarah admitted during our consultation, "but I know his playbook. I worked as a paralegal in his firm for 3 years before going to law school. And I genuinely want to help you fight this injustice." Her honesty and determination convinced me. I hired Sarah with the last of my personal savings and began working with her to build my defense. Our first court appearance was for a preliminary hearing to establish temporary arrangements during the divorce proceedings. Raymond Walsh arrived in an impeccable suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Jessica sat beside him, dressed conservatively but expensively, the perfect picture of a successful businesswoman. Walsh painted me as a failed dreamer who had been supported by his hardworking wife while pursuing unrealistic ambitions. He requested that all assets be frozen during proceedings, except for a stipend for Jessica to maintain her standard of living. "Mr. Wilson's project has produced no income," Walsh argued smoothly. "Yet he continues to pour money into it while relying on his wife's earnings. We ask that he be restricted from accessing any marital funds to further finance his speculative venture." The judge granted their request, freezing all our assets except for minimal living allowances for both of us. Mine was significantly smaller than Jessica's. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, my financial situation became increasingly dire. I had to sell my car to pay for ongoing legal fees. I moved out of our home and into a small studio apartment in a less desirable part of town. I continued working at ByteSecure, but the stress of the divorce and the ongoing battle for my intellectual property was taking its toll on my performance. Many of our mutual friends sided with Jessica. She had always been charming and sociable, while I was the quieter, more introverted partner. She controlled the narrative, telling everyone that I had become obsessed with my project to the detriment of our marriage, and that she had supported me for years with nothing to show for it. The darkest moment came when Daniel Thompson's company announced the upcoming release of a new security application called ShieldSafe that promised revolutionary protection for cloud data. The description in the press release was nearly identical to my Secure Vault concept. They were moving quickly to beat me to market, knowing that the divorce proceedings had effectively paralyzed my ability to launch my own product. I was nearly ready to give up when a stroke of luck changed everything. While cleaning out some old files from a laptop I rarely used, I discovered a cache of automatically saved email drafts that Jessica had written on my computer months earlier when her laptop was being repaired. She had apparently forgotten about them, and they had never been synced to her accounts. These draft emails addressed to Daniel outlined their entire plan in explicit detail. They had been planning to appropriate my work for over a year. Jessica had systematically gathered information about my research, copied my code, and shared it all with Daniel. The emails also revealed that they had been romantically involved for at least 8 months. Most damning of all was a draft that detailed how they had established TechShield LLC using money withdrawn from our joint savings, and how they had filed a patent application for my encryption algorithm under their company name. I immediately called Sarah and arranged to meet her first thing the next morning. When I showed her the emails, she actually gasped. "This changes everything," she said rapidly, taking notes. "This is not just divorce law anymore. This is intellectual property theft, fraud, and potentially criminal misappropriation of funds." Sarah brought in a colleague who specialized in intellectual property law, and together they helped me develop a new strategy. We would continue with the divorce proceedings as if nothing had changed, allowing Jessica and Walsh to believe they were winning. Meanwhile, we prepared a comprehensive case, documenting the theft of my intellectual property and the fraudulent business activities. The next 2 months were incredibly difficult. I had to continue facing Jessica and Walsh in court, while pretending I had no knowledge of their scheme. Walsh became increasingly arrogant, making snide comments about how I would soon be left with nothing. Jessica avoided looking at me directly, but occasionally I would catch her smirking when Walsh would score a particularly effective point. We filed subpoenas for financial records that revealed Jessica and Daniel had indeed used our marital funds to establish their company. We gathered evidence from the patent office showing they had filed applications based on my work. We even deposed former colleagues who confirmed that the security application had been solely my creation from the beginning. By the time our final court date arrived, we were fully prepared, yet Jessica and Walsh remained completely unaware of what was coming. The courtroom felt suffocating as I sat at the defendant table trying to maintain my composure. My attorney Sarah sat beside me, calm and collected despite being up against Raymond Walsh, who had earned the nickname the Shark for his aggressive litigation tactics. The wooden bench felt hard beneath me, but not as hard as the stares from Jessica and her lawyer. Judge Patricia Lawson entered the courtroom, her expression stern and unreadable, as she took her seat at the bench. She had a reputation for being fair but tough, with little patience for games or delays. Today she would issue her final ruling on our divorce settlement, including the critical matter of my intellectual property rights. "All rise," called the bailiff, and we stood as Judge Lawson settled herself and reviewed the papers before her. "Be seated," she said. "We are here to finalize the divorce proceedings of Jessica Wilson versus Maynard Wilson. Mr. Walsh, you may present your closing statement." Raymond Walsh stood buttoning his expensive suit jacket with manicured fingers. He was tall and imposing, with silver hair that spoke of experience and the confidence of a man who rarely lost. "Thank you, Your Honor," he began, his voice resonating through the courtroom. "Over the course of these proceedings, we have established that Mrs. Wilson was the primary breadwinner throughout this marriage, supporting Mr. Wilson while he pursued a speculative project that has produced no income to date." Walsh paced slowly before the judge, occasionally glancing at me with thinly veiled contempt. "Mrs. Wilson contributed not only financially but also intellectually to this security application. Her marketing expertise and business acumen helped shape the project, and her income provided the stability that allowed Mr. Wilson the luxury of working on it." This was a blatant lie, but I kept my expression neutral as Walsh continued. "Furthermore, the intellectual property was developed during the marriage using communal resources and is therefore marital property subject to division. Given Mrs. Wilson's significant contributions, both financial and intellectual, she is entitled to the majority share of all assets, including full rights to the security application." Walsh turned to look directly at me, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Mr. Wilson quite frankly lacks the business acumen to successfully bring this product to market. Mrs. Wilson and her new business partners have the resources and expertise to realize its potential, which would ultimately benefit both parties through increased value of the asset." He returned to his table, placing a hand on Jessica's shoulder. She looked up at him with a satisfied smile. "In conclusion, Your Honor, we ask that you grant our petition for Mrs. Wilson to receive 70% of all marital assets, including full intellectual property rights to the security application. Mr. Wilson has contributed little to the marriage financially and has shown poor judgment in his career choices. He should consider himself fortunate to walk away with 30% of assets he did little to accumulate. With that, Walsh sat down, exchanging a confident glance with Jessica. I could see them already celebrating their victory. "Thank you, Mr. Walsh," said Judge Lawson, making a note on her pad. "Miss Jenkins, your closing statement." Sarah stood straightening her simple but professional blazer. While she lacked Walsh's imposing presence, her eyes held a sharp intelligence that I had come to trust completely over the past months. "Your Honor, Mr. Wilson does not dispute that Mrs. Wilson contributed financially to their household. However, the narrative presented by opposing counsel is fundamentally misleading and incomplete." Sarah approached the bench, her posture confident. Mr. Wilson maintained full-time employment throughout the marriage. His work on the security application was done in his personal time, using his specialized expertise in encryption algorithms that predated the marriage. Mrs. Wilson's claim of intellectual contribution is entirely unsupported by evidence. She turned to face Jessica directly. "In fact, Your Honor, we have reason to believe that Mrs. Wilson's interest in the intellectual property is not based on any legitimate contribution, but rather on a calculated plan to misappropriate Mr. Wilson's work for her own benefit." I could see Jessica shift uncomfortably in her seat as Walsh leaned over to whisper something to her. However, Sarah continued, "Rather than making accusations at this time, we ask that the court make an equitable division of assets based on actual contributions. Mr. Wilson is willing to accept a 50-50 split of the marital home and investments while retaining full rights to the intellectual property he created." As Sarah returned to her seat, Walsh immediately stood again. "Your Honor, opposing counsel is making veiled accusations without evidence. Mrs. Wilson categorically denies any improper behavior and stands by her claim to the intellectual property as marital property, to which she made substantial contributions." Judge Lawson raised her hand to silence him. "I understand your position, Mr. Walsh. Now, before I make my ruling, I would like to hear directly from the parties." She turned to Jessica. "Mrs. Wilson, do you have anything you would like to say to the court?" Jessica stood wearing a conservative navy dress that emphasized her professional image. She spoke with practiced emotion, her voice catching at just the right moments. "Your Honor, I supported Maynard emotionally and financially while he pursued his dreams. I believed in him and his project, often at the expense of my own career advancement. I offered business insights and connections that helped shape the application. Now that we are divorcing, it seems unfair that he would retain sole ownership of something we built together during our marriage." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I simply want what is fair given my contributions to both the marriage and the project." Judge Lawson nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson." Then she turned to me. "Mr. Wilson, do you have any final words before I make my ruling?" This was the moment we had prepared for. I stood slowly, meeting the judge's gaze. "Actually, yes, Your Honor. I would like to submit this as evidence." Walsh was on his feet immediately. "Objection. Discovery is closed. This is completely irregular and inadmissible." Judge Lawson frowned. "Mr. Wilson, Mr. Walsh is correct. The time for submitting evidence has passed." "Your Honor, Sarah interjected this evidence was discovered after the discovery deadline and constitutes newly discovered evidence that directly contradicts testimony given in these proceedings. Under Rule 60B, the court has discretion to consider new evidence in the interest of justice, particularly evidence of fraud upon the court. The judge considered this for a moment. "I will allow it, but this better be relevant and significant, Miss Jenkins." She turned to me. "Proceed, Mr. Wilson." Sarah handed me the folder, and I approached the bench, placing it before Judge Lawson. "Your Honor, this folder contains emails written by Jessica Wilson to Daniel Thompson, a venture capitalist who is now her business partner. These emails detail a deliberate plan to misappropriate my intellectual property and establish a competing business using marital funds without my knowledge or consent." Jessica's face drained of color as the judge opened the folder and began reading the emails. Her eyes widened as she progressed through the documents. Additionally, I continued. The folder contains financial records showing withdrawals from our joint accounts that were used to establish TechShield LLC, a company formed by Mrs. Wilson and Mr. Thompson for the purpose of commercializing my stolen work. There is also documentation of a patent application filed by TechShield for my encryption algorithm. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even Walsh seemed momentarily speechless as he tried to look over Jessica's shoulder at the documents. Your Honor, Walsh finally managed. My client denies the authenticity of these alleged emails. They could easily be fabricated. Judge Lawson looked up from the documents, her expression severe. Mr. Walsh, these emails contain detailed technical specifications and business plans that match exactly with patent applications filed by TechShield LLC. They reference specific withdrawals from the Wilsons' joint account that bank records confirm were made by Mrs. Wilson. The metadata and electronic signatures appear intact. She turned her gaze to Jessica, who was now visibly trembling. Mrs. Wilson, did you write these emails? Jessica looked to Walsh, who subtly shook his head. I cannot recall, Your Honor, Jessica said weakly. Let me be more specific. Judge Lawson continued, holding up one of the papers. Did you write, and I quote, once the divorce is finalized and I secure the IP rights, we can accelerate the launch of ShieldSafe under TechShield. Maynard will have no legal recourse once the court awards me ownership as part of the settlement. The courtroom was so quiet, you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Jessica's composure finally cracked. He was never going to do anything with it, she burst out. I found investors and created a viable business plan. All he did was code. He had no vision for commercialization. Walsh closed his eyes in defeat as Jessica continued her unintended confession. The application would be worthless without proper marketing and business development. I deserved to benefit from it after supporting him for years. Judge Lawson's face hardened. Mrs. Wilson, are you admitting to the authenticity of these emails and the actions described therein? Realizing her mistake, Jessica fell silent, looking desperately at Walsh. Your Honor, Walsh said, recovering his professional demeanor, I request a recess to confer with my client. Denied, said Judge Lawson firmly. Mr. Walsh, given what has just been revealed, I am inclined to refer this matter to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges, including fraud, misappropriation of funds, and intellectual property theft. Do you understand the seriousness of what has transpired here today? Walsh's professional mask slipped completely. Your Honor, I was not aware of these actions. I request permission to withdraw as counsel. That request will be considered later, Judge Lawson replied coldly. For now, we will complete these proceedings. She turned to address the courtroom. Based on the evidence presented today, I am ruling as follows. First, the divorce is granted on grounds of irreconcilable differences. Second, Mr. Wilson shall retain full and exclusive rights to the intellectual property related to the security application he developed. Third, all marital assets shall be divided with 60% going to Mr. Wilson and 40% to Mrs. Wilson, from which she will be responsible for paying Mr. Wilson's legal fees. Jessica slumped in her chair as Judge Lawson continued. Furthermore, I am issuing an immediate injunction against TechShield LLC, prohibiting them from using, developing, or marketing any technology based on Mr. Wilson's work. I am also referring this matter to the District Attorney for investigation of potential criminal charges against Mrs. Wilson and Mr. Thompson. She fixed Jessica with a stern look. Mrs. Wilson, your actions constitute a serious breach of fiduciary duty to your spouse and potentially rise to the level of criminal conduct. The court takes a dim view of attempting to use divorce proceedings to legitimize what appears to be straightforward theft. With a bang of her gavel, Judge Lawson closed the proceedings. This court is adjourned. Mr. Wilson, Miss Jenkins, please remain for a moment to complete the necessary paperwork. As Jessica and Walsh hurried out of the courtroom, avoiding eye contact with everyone, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. The marriage I had once valued was truly over-ended, not just by growing apart but by deliberate betrayal. Yet in that moment I also felt the first stirrings of freedom and the possibility of a new beginning. The weeks following the divorce judgment were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. The news about Jessica and Daniel's scheme spread quickly through Seattle's tech community. TechShield LLC collapsed as investors pulled out, unwilling to be associated with what the local tech blog called one of the most brazen IP theft attempts in recent memory. Daniel Thompson's reputation was shattered. The venture capital firm where he had been a partner asked for his resignation, and several companies he had previously invested in severed ties with him. Jessica, who had cultivated such a careful professional image, found herself essentially blacklisted in the local tech industry. Criminal investigations were indeed launched, though I found I had mixed feelings about this. Part of me wanted justice for what they had done, but another part just wanted to move forward with my life rather than dwelling in the past. In the end, they both accepted plea deals that included significant financial restitution, community service, and probation. As for me, I returned to my small apartment and focused on rebuilding. With the legal ownership of my security application now firmly established, I was able to attract legitimate investors. Sarah Jenkins connected me with Marcus Leong, a venture capitalist with a strong ethical reputation, who was impressed not only with the technology, but with how I had handled the entire ordeal. Anyone who can maintain that level of strategic thinking, while under such personal and professional stress, is someone I want to work with. Marcus told me during our first meeting, with Marcus's investment, I was able to properly launch SecureVault and bring my security application to market. The irony was not lost on me that the publicity surrounding the divorce case had created significant industry buzz about the application. Several major technology news outlets ran stories about the divorce case security app, giving us the kind of publicity that would have cost millions in marketing. Professionally, things were finally looking up, but personally, I still had healing to do. The betrayal by someone I had loved and trusted had left deep wounds. I found myself hesitant to form new relationships, questioning my judgment and ability to trust. A former colleague suggested I join a support group for people who had experienced difficult divorces. Initially reluctant, I finally attended a meeting and found it surprisingly helpful. Hearing others share similar experiences made me realize I was not alone, and the betrayal was not a reflection of my worth or character. One of the group members, Anthony, became a close friend. He had been through a similarly difficult divorce 3 years earlier and had come out the other side stronger. The hardest part, he told me over coffee, after one meeting, is not letting the experience change who you are. You can become wiser without becoming bitter. His words stuck with me, and I began to consciously work on maintaining my capacity for trust and openness despite what had happened. I started volunteering at a local coding boot camp, teaching aspiring developers the basics of cybersecurity. The act of sharing knowledge and helping others pursue their dreams became unexpectedly therapeutic. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, SecureVault secured its first major corporate client, a regional banking chain that implemented our security solution across their entire digital infrastructure. The successful implementation led to referrals and additional clients, and within a year, the company was not only profitable, but growing rapidly. I moved from my small apartment to a modest but comfortable condo closer to our new office. I built a team of talented developers who shared my vision for creating security solutions that were both powerful and accessible. We expanded our product line to include solutions for different sectors from healthcare to education. One of my proudest moments came when we established the SecureVault Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provided cybersecurity education and resources to vulnerable populations, including domestic violence survivors who needed to protect their digital lives from abusive former partners. The foundation was my way of transforming a painful experience into something that could help others facing difficult transitions. I occasionally heard updates about Jessica through mutual acquaintances. After struggling to find work in Seattle, she had moved to Portland to restart her career. Daniel had relocated to the East Coast. I found that over time, thinking about them evoked less pain and anger. It was not so much that I had forgiven them, but rather that they simply occupied less space in my thoughts as I built my new life. 2 years after the divorce, SecureVault was acquired by a larger tech company for a sum that would have seemed unimaginable during those dark days of the divorce proceedings. I stayed on as Chief Technical Officer, continuing to develop new security solutions while mentoring younger team members. The journey from betrayal to success taught me lessons I never expected to learn. I discovered a resilience within myself that I did not know existed. I learned that patience and strategic thinking are often more powerful than immediate reactions. Most importantly, I came to understand that what initially seems like an ending can actually be the beginning of something better. For those of you watching who might be going through your own personal or professional betrayals, remember that how you respond to these challenges ultimately defines their impact on your life. Document everything, seek proper legal advice, and never let anyone convince you to surrender what you have rightfully created. Sometimes justice takes time, but truth has a way of eventually coming to light. Have you ever experienced a situation where patience and preparation helped you overcome a seemingly impossible challenge? Share your story in the comments below. If this tale of resilience resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of triumph over adversity. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message today, share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, what matters most is not what happens to you, but how you choose to respond to it.